Brandi is 65 years old, and although she was planning to work a couple more years, her mother has been in poor health, and she wants to spend as much time with her as possible before she passes away. With this in mind, let's take a look at her situation to see if her and her husband Brian can responsibly stop working now and have a sustainable retirement for the rest of their life. When it comes to retirement planning, obviously finances are at the front of this decision, but other considerations like spending time with family are also very important. And these are the kinds of decisions that people usually have to make when it comes to their finances and retirement. So without any further ado, let's jump into this case study to see how we can maximize their situation, see how realistic it would be for them to retire now, and what we can do to put them in the best financial situation as possible. Let's get right into this video. I find that talking with people from around the country when it comes to retirement, obviously, since I'm a financial advisor, I always end up having financial conversations about retirement, but there's usually always some other kind of major life situation that's driving somebody towards wanting to retire. Most people have the decision if they want to work an extra 6 months, an extra year. You could keep working. It's kind of the default to follow. And so deciding whether it's time to retire is usually driven by some type of life event. In this instance, Brandi's mother's in poor health and they want to spend as much time with her as possible. With that in mind, let's look at their situation to answer a few questions. How much income is sustainable for the rest of their life? How can we maximize that income? As well as, is there anything that they can do to save taxes so they can keep as much of their hard-earned savings for themselves? It's also important to them to think about possibly leaving an inheritance for their own children. Brandi expects to receive a small inheritance from her mother, and she truly appreciates this gift and wants to be able to pass that on to the next generation. So let's look over their numbers. Brandi and Brian, they live in Texas. They've saved $1 million for retirement. $750,000 of that is in an IRA, and $250,000 they've saved in a brokerage account. Now, Brandi expects to inherit about $150,000 from the sale of her mom's home when she passes away, and the home was worth more than that, but it's going to be divided among Brandi and her siblings. So looking at all those numbers, let's see what would be realistic. Now, we also have to take into consideration their income sources. Both of them qualify for Social Security benefits. If Brian waits until age 67, he expects to receive $4,000 a month from Social Security, and Brandi would get $2,500 a month. That's her work history benefit that she would receive. So with all that in mind, where does that put them for retirement? So on the screen in front of us, if you've watched in my videos before, you know this is going to look familiar to you, but here in the center of the page, we have their projected balance, and this is for January of 2026. And on the right, we can see what is their retirement paycheck. Now, what's interesting about this is that Brandi and Brian are used to living on less than, $10,000 a month. In fact, they feel comfortable that if they had something like $7,000 a month, that would easily cover all of their expenses. And frankly, thinking about stuff they'd like to do, like doing extra travel, having $8,000 a month would be great. So this turns out to be pretty good news for their situation. In fact, working with people, it's a pretty common thing that they're pleasantly surprised by how much income they could have sustainably in retirement. And so now it goes from, okay, do we have enough money to retire? And then it turns into, are there extra things that we should think about doing that we could do given the extra income that we're going to have available to us? So first, let's just look at how sustainable their retirement plan would be. So I'm going to come over to this risk analysis to say, okay, if they retired right now with $1 million and their Social Security benefits, what is the likelihood that they would be able to have this amount of income adjusted for inflation for the rest of their life? And you can see what we've done is with this risk analysis, we have mapped their retirement plan against about 150 years of market data going back to 1870 and run it through thousands of different variations of those years to get us a sense of, okay, historically speaking, how strong is this plan? And in 83% of those scenarios that we ran, they were able to have their $10,000 a month net adjusted for inflation. Now here what it's saying is that on average, they were actually able to have about a 20% higher income than their planned income. Now over here on the right, you can see the 17% of below scenario. What this means is that not that they ran out of money in their plan, but basically that at some point throughout their plan, they needed to take a small downward adjustment in their income in order to keep their plan on track. So what was a typical drop that they needed to take? Well, on average, they needed to reduce their income by about 1% in order to keep their portfolio keep it on track. And in the worst case scenario, out of the thousands of scenarios that were run, they needed to reduce their income by about 15%. So for them, this is really great news because with $10,000 a month, like I mentioned, that's already well above what they actually need in retirement, and so they're feeling pretty confident with this overall risk assessment. Now, talked about leaving a legacy for their children. Because Brandi expects to receive some inheritance from her mother, she really likes the idea of being able to leave something to their children. And Brandi and Brian have 3 children, and so they're not necessarily set on a specific number that they'd like to leave to them, but if there were something left behind that, they like that idea. So now we're looking at the projection of their retirement portfolio. So they have $1 million saved, and remember, Brandi's expecting to inherit about $150,000 from her mother. So looking at this, if we look at different scenarios, and again, we're matching this against 150 years of data going back to 1870, what's most realistic is they're going to have something around 1.8 million left over in their portfolio when they pass away. Now, obviously, this is based off of average market returns, but what if returns in the market are not very good at all? Like, what if they're horrible? Or what if they're really good? So now we can kind of see a spectrum of possibility from like a very optimistic to a very pessimistic to probably what's maybe an average result. So on the worst case scenario is you can see that based on history, by the time they pass away, they would be leaving behind about $865,000. And in the best case scenario, let's say, sometimes things work out really well, they would be leaving about $5 million when they pass away. And that's after about 30 and a half, 31 years of retirement is what we're looking at. So this would take them into their mid-90s. So from a risk standpoint, their plan is looking pretty good. Let's look at their cash flow and see where money is coming from over the course of their retirement. So one of the things that somebody has to do when they retire is decide on their Social Security claiming strategy. So what we ran is a couple scenarios to see, is there a way to kind of maximize income overall? And what we came up with is for Brian to delay his Social Security until age 70 from 65 until 70. And this is because he has a higher benefit than Brandi. So by delaying his benefit from getting these delayed 8% per year credits from age 67 to 70. So when he takes his benefit at age 70, instead of getting $4,000 a month, he's going to get a 24% increase on his benefit plus cost of living adjustment. Now, Brandi, she could claim her benefit at 70 as well, but it actually turned out when we looked at different scenarios, by her claiming early, actually at age 65 when they retire, that was the way to get the best mix of maximizing their Social Security benefit and maximizing their overall income. So you can see here on this chart that in the beginning years of their retirement, they'd be pulling out about $11,000 per month, or that'd be the total monthly income. Now of that, about $2,250 is coming from Brandi's Social Security benefit, and then the remainder, about $8,750 is coming from the portfolio. As we go along and we get about 5 years into retirement, when Brian claims Social Security, he's now receiving, instead of $4,000 a month, about $5,300. Now remember, that's because his regular benefit's $4,000. He gets a 24% bonus for waiting till 70 plus cost of living adjustments. That's why that number is a little bit higher than maybe what you would expect. And remember, Brandi is still receiving her Social Security benefit, and by this time it's actually grown to about $2,500 a month with cost of living adjustments. And at that time, they're pulling out about $3,500 from the portfolio. And as they go through time, they're getting cost of living adjustments with Social Security, and so they're less and less dependent on their portfolio as time goes along. So now that we know that we figured out a way for them to maximize their income, we've looked at realistically how strong is this plan? Does it stand up even during bad conditions? Let's look at it from a tax perspective to see if there's anything that they can do in order to keep more of the money that they've saved and spend less on taxes, less on Social Security taxes, and less on Medicare premiums, which of course are higher if you have higher income, you have to pay higher cost for Medicare. So if we can keep those taxes lower, it's going to save them a lot of money over time. So let's look at kind of some of the possibilities to figure out a good plan here. So if I come over to this tax lab, okay, so what this is doing now is we can look at different ways to pull money out of the portfolio. So remember, they've got $750,000 in an IRA, $250,000 in a brokerage and cash savings, and then also Brandi is inheriting $150,000 that she'll actually receive tax-free because it's from the sale of her mother's home when she passes away. So with that in mind, we can look at where's the best place for them to pull money from their portfolio. Is there any kind of particular strategy they could do in order to reduce taxes overall? You can also look at Roth conversions, which is, if you haven't heard this concept before, pretty straightforward. What that means is we're shifting money from an IRA, paying taxes, converting it into a Roth IRA so that all the future growth is growing tax-free. So we can look at different combination of strategies to find the optimal solution. So in their case, what it looks like is that if we target a 12% Roth conversion strategy over the life of their retirement, it's going to save them about 5.7% per year in taxes, which for them equals about $446,000 of lower taxes, that amount of higher income, and being able able to leave a higher net legacy or kind of money that's available to their children when they pass away. So overall, doing this simple Roth conversion approach, it's really going to improve their overall plan, helping them accomplish all of their goals. Now, kind of interesting how this lays out. Because they're inheriting some money from Brandi's mother and that's tax-free, you would think, okay, well, if Brandi wants to be able to pass money on to her children, when she gets that inheritance, she could just set that aside and let that grow. But actually, from a tax perspective, a better way to go about this would actually be for her to live, for them to live on that inheritance when they receive it, draw that down and spend that down for income, and then that allows them to take some of their IRA money and put it into Roth and allow that to grow to leave as an inheritance. The benefit from there is that if they let the Roth IRAs grow over time, the Roth IRAs, you don't have to pay any taxes on the capital gains, the dividends, and the interest over time, and so it's going to be an overall more tax efficient plan than simply investing the inheritance money and living on the IRA money. So when it comes to an overall retirement plan, if you don't take into consideration all these different dynamics, then you're probably not going to maximize your overall income and you're just leaving dollars on the table. So with all this in mind, as we've looked over the numbers, you can see that actually, yes, for Brandi and Brian, it's very realistic for them to retire right now. Yeah, they could work more and they would have more retirement income if they did, but these are the kind of, decisions that you have to make. Like, is it worth it to have a few extra $100 working a couple more years? Or is it more important to spend this time with family? Because she's not going to get another chance. And so often it can be very difficult for somebody to just like pull the trigger and make a decision like that. But if you run the numbers for your own situation, look at your overall plan, it can give you a lot of confidence to say, hey, you know what? I'm not being financially irresponsible by deciding to stop working now. I'm not jeopardizing my own financial security to spend this time with family. So hopefully this has given you a good overall perspective and kind of bird's eye view of how to think about making a decision to retire when you're faced with some type of family situation. If you'd like some help looking at your scenario, thinking through strategies that you could use to maximize your own situation and allow you to retire sooner than you were expecting, click the link in the description below to schedule a free one-on-one consultation. I'd be happy to talk about your situation with you and help you come up with some ideas to improve your overall retirement. So with all that in mind, I hope this video was helpful. I hope you have a great week and I'll see you next week.